Fake news in wartime. War is an especially political subject that takes enormous effort to plan, fund, and put into action. Here are some of the craziest fake news stories about war that were proven to be wrong. Elizabeth McIntosh was a reporter and visionary strategist who used phony news to attack the Japanese during World War II. She was part of the OSS's, or Office of Strategic Services, Morale Operation Branch and Psychological Warfare Laboratory. Her main objective was to use psychological warfare to destroy the morale of Japanese soldiers and civilians by instilling defeatism among them. Releasing false information and bad news was a method used by McIntosh to generally describe the lack of food, soldiers' inferior malfunctioning weapons, military defeats, and other fabricated tales of woe to totally demoralize the Japanese people. She would often intercept letters from Japanese soldiers to their families and change the contents to express these hardships. Elizabeth also used her knowledge of the Asian and Japanese culture to invent fake astrological predictions made up by fictional gurus, which she then published in newspapers. The climax of her misinformation was a fake order that repealed sanctions against Japanese surrenders. Although false, it had a positive impact on both sides. Not only were the Japanese more willing to consider surrendering, but the American troops were less severe in their conduct with enemy units that did lay down their arms. Elizabeth's fake news strategy was so successful that in a tribute in 1994 on Memorial Day, President Bill Clinton declared that, quote, "she saved lives on both sides," end quote. Elizabeth McIntosh's strategy was a key factor in the Allied victory in World War II, and her ingenious tactics will forever be remembered as an example of how fake news can sometimes be used for good. Fake news also affected Germany during World War II in multiple ways. The most notable example is Sefton Delmer's black propaganda campaign against the Nazis, which included the creation of the fictional broadcaster Der Chef. Sefton Delmer was a British journalist who created Der Chef to demoralize the German people. The broadcasts denounced the corruption of Nazi headquarters by spreading rumors that German soldiers had erroneously received infusions of blood from captured Poles and Slavs who had been infected with syphilis. To add insult to injury, the broadcast also recounted stories about an Italian diplomat in Berlin sleeping around with the wives of German officers. This fake news was designed to create doubt and distrust in the minds of German citizens and soldiers. In addition to Delmer's campaign, the British used other forms of fake news to disrupt and demoralize German forces. This included a radio station presented by a young German called Vicky, who read a mixture of real and fabricated news, as well as a German-language newspaper called Nachrichten für die Truppe, or News for the Troops, which was airdropped to soldiers on the Western Front. All of these tactics were designed to create confusion and dissent among German forces, which contributed to the overall Allied victory. By creating doubt and distrust among German citizens and soldiers, Allied forces spread misinformation, which ultimately affected the Nazi war effort. Less than 2 months before the United States joined World War II, President Franklin Delano Roosevelt took the stage at the Mayflower Hotel in Washington, D.C., to give a speech for Navy Day. He knew that with Britain fighting alone against Nazi Germany, his country would need to join in the fight in order to stop the Third Reich. Using Navy Day as a platform to rally the nation, Roosevelt interrupted his speech to hold up a map. "I have in my possession a secret map made by Hitler's government," he explained. "It is a map of South America and part of Central America as Hitler proposes to reorganize it." The room was shocked. As recently as 1940, only 7% of the populace in the United States supported joining the war. Now, the president was holding up documents that proved Nazi Germany intended on expanding into the Americas. Roosevelt also released the documents that day, which showed Hitler's pledge to eliminate all religion throughout the world. As the room erupted into an uproar, reporters were thrown into a frenzy as they competed to get the president's attention. Everyone in the room had guessed that intervention in the war was becoming inevitable. Eagerly listening to the president's words, the public was thoroughly convinced of Germany's evil agenda. The documents unquestionably placed Germany and the United States in opposite corners. Only one thing was kept out of the president's speech: the documents were fake. Both the map and pledge were the work of a Canadian spy master named William Stevenson and were designed as tools to encourage the United States into joining the war. Stevenson was the head of a British propaganda organization which had offices in the Rockefeller Center, and his sole mission was to drag the United States into the war. Stevenson worked on many similar projects to sway the American public's opinion of the war. After meeting with the head of the FBI, he was named head of MI6 in the United States. This is the Foreign Intelligence Service of the United Kingdom. Their mission statement is Covert Overseas Collection and Analysis of Human Intelligence in Support of the UK's National Security. With the backing of MI6, Stevenson was able to manipulate and weaponize information to create public outrage against Germany. Throughout history, men such as Stevenson have spread misinformation and propaganda to manipulate global affairs. Jim Morrison, famous lead singer for the American rock band The Doors, often expressed the senselessness of war through his songwriting abilities. In songs such as Unknown Soldier, he relates the story of a man going off to war and dying while his family is eating breakfast and watching television. While many people remember the late singer and his legacy as a legendary singer from the 1960s, much less is known about his father, Admiral George Stephen Morrison, and his role in getting the United States involved in Vietnam. He was the commander of the 3rd Fleet Carrier Division in the Pacific when the destroyers USS Turner Joy and USS Maddox reported they had been attacked by North Vietnamese ships. The two vessels were on a DeSoto patrol, which is an acronym for De Haven Special Operations off Tsingtao, collecting intelligence in hostile waters when they intercepted some communications between North Vietnamese ships. The American sailors believed an attack was imminent, and they watched their sonar equipment eagerly for any signs of movement. Sure enough, the crew received radar and sonar returns of enemy ships and were soon given orders to fire on the North Vietnamese. Word got back to President Johnson of the Vietnamese aggression, and the United States issued a statement that retaliation would follow. This incident became known as the Gulf of Tonkin incident and contributed directly to the United States' decision to engage the North Vietnamese directly. Johnson used this incident to justify America's involvement in the Vietnam War. He, like the sailors on the USS Maddox and USS Turner Joy, believed that the United States had been physically attacked. It was only revealed 40 years later in 2003 that the entire episode had been imagined. There were no North Vietnamese ships close to the DeSoto patrol. The sailors had simply been jumpy and alone on dark waters. President Johnson's retaliation orders had been built on a fabricated premise. While many still debate whether bad communication or someone purposely misleading the president was to blame, the Gulf of Tonkin incident represents another way in which fake news about war swayed public opinion and influenced foreign policy. Propaganda in war is as old as war itself. Whether it's used to inspire soldiers or terrorize the enemy, misinformation is extremely effective in shaping public perceptions. By using bogus news, some of the most influential figures in history have been able to turn the tide of major wars. William Stevenson, Elizabeth McIntosh, and Sefton Delmer are only a few of the most well-known examples of those who have used this method to manipulate global events. By creating false information or by weaponizing existing data, these individuals have been able to convince the public to rally behind their cause and support their agenda. While fabricating the truth can be used for malicious purposes, it can also be used to help bring about a positive change. The stories of these individuals and their use of fake news to influence war prove that there is more to it than meets the eye. Countries have often created fictitious armies by controlling and deliberately leaking misinformation. So the next time you hear something on the news, be very careful about its authenticity and wonder if someone is trying to hoodwink you.